Welcome to the Create More Value podcast, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, the boutique shareholder value improvement advisory firm. Create More Value is a series of conversations with senior executives, board members, investors, and other experts that have overcome challenges to create exceptional value for their companies. There are many ways to drive value, so we cover a wide range of topics. I am the host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. I'd like to welcome my good friend, Gary Bischoping. Thank you, Gary, for joining me on our Fortuna Advisors podcast, Create More Value.
Pleasure to be here with you, Greg. Looking forward to it.
Gary joined as partner of the private equity firm Hellman Friedman in 2021, and he leads the Finance Center of Excellence. His primary responsibility is to help H&F drive value by improving the effectiveness of the finance organizations of the firm's portfolio companies. He is a director of At Home and Simply Safe. Gary has over 25 years of experience working with global organizations on all aspects of corporate finance, operations, and strategy. Prior to H&F, he held the chief financial officer roles at both Finastra, which is private equity-backed, and Varian Medical Systems, which was a public company. Gary also served as a divisional CFO and treasurer, amongst other roles, for Dell Technologies. And before Dell, Gary was an associate at Stern Stewart, the EVA company, which is where we met, although we never worked on a client engagement together. Gary recently told me operationalizing value creation is my superpower, and on the spot it was clear this should be the main focus of this interview. So I'll roll right into my questions, Gary. Welcome, and tell us about how you transitioned from being a consultant to a corporate executive and now to being an investor. What's common and what's different among these roles?
Yeah, super. Thanks, Greg. And as you know, I'm a corporate finance junkie, right? I still receive and read the Journal of Applied Corporate Finance. And so it's been really amazing to see, kind of the business world from those three different vantage points. And I would tell you, one of the common elements from a micro perspective is you still have to focus on the fundamentals. In the end, it comes down to developing an understanding of the market you're in, be it a consultant, competing against other consulting companies, or the competitors, you're faced in those markets. Being a corporate executive, thinking your way through who those competitors are and how you're going to win against them. And then you have to think about your customers and products, from an investor perspective. As it turns out, having a product that someone likes and is willing to part their way with their money for is a really good idea from an investor's perspective. And so it still comes down to those kind of fundamentals. It sounds simple, but a lot of people skip that step, right? They go right into getting stuff done when they get into a new job. And I just think starting from those fundamentals is important. I'd say another common element that I see is that you're only as good as your team. It kind of sounds a little cliche or whatever you want to call about it, but like that's the way you get lift and scale and get a lot of stuff done. And when you surround yourself with people that have different perspectives and, frankly, the people that make you better, right, you end up really being able to scale and achieve some tremendous things. And so I think those are common in all three of those different types of roles. I'd say one of the major differences is around what role you are playing as part of those three different constituencies interacting with a company. And so, for me, the idea around, finding a framework or someone, an idea person or a framework person, that's kind of a consultant's role, right? What's the idea? What's the framework by which to execute against something? But then, you have to get into driving, executing, delivering results. That's kind of management's job. That's being a corporate executive. Whereas the investor side is more about guiding and steering big foundational decisions. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a different perspective that you bring to the table when you interact with that organization as to what role you're playing and how you play it and to be successful, as you add value to that company.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So I opened with it, but what did you mean when you told me that operationalizing value creation is my superpower?
Yeah, I'm not so sure many people would resonate with that. So I think it's a good place to start. It is something that I'm reasonably proud of, though, and something that I spent 30 years doing. And look, the way I would summarize it, Greg, is there's a lot of people with great ideas, but an idea is only as good as your ability to bring it to life, which I think is relevant in many aspects of your life, but also very pertinent to the business world. And there are a few powerful ways to make that happen. And kind of one of them is when you see it done well, you see alignment from strategic intent to an operational plan to a workforce
Hmm.
plan that derives a financial outcome. That's
Hmm.
when you know you've got it, you've done it, you have that superpower. Um, and I've seen a lot of cases where any one or many of those elements are not aligned,
Hmm.
which materially inhibits execution and often fails to capture the value of what might have been a really great idea.
Hmm.
And so for
Hmm.
me, helping people, organizations, companies, boards, in my case, my partners, and for our limited partners, helping our companies find that equation of aligning strategic intent with an operational plan, a people plan to deliver that life, bring that financial plan to life. That's what I mean by operationalizing, a value creation plan.
Oh, that's great. That's great. When we spoke, you talked about three legs of the stool: decision-making rights, measuring right, paying right. Can you explain it a little bit, but also give me examples of each?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I'm a corporate finance junkie, and this goes back to my Simon School of Business days. And there, took a lot of great classes, but one class in particular, we talked a lot about kind of the theory of the firm, which Michael Jensen, was at Harvard Business School, and Bill Meckling was at the University of Rochester Simon Business School when they published that in 1976. I'm sure everybody's read it on the podcast, so thank you. I'm sure they all know what that was. But if they didn't read it, one of the key elements that they call out in that is what I refer to as the three legs of the stool. And so the three legs of the stool are: you assign somebody a decision making right, you
Hmm.
measure them based on that decision making right, and then you pay them accordingly. And if any of those three legs of the stool get out of balance or aren't contemplated, then you have to intervene in that ecosystem in order for that stool to stand up, or otherwise said, you have to manage the system to get the optimal outcome in the same sense of the business.
Hmm.
So, the decision making rights, for example, at Dell early on, Michael set up a comp plan where he was measuring people based on getting to a revenue target over a 5-year period of time, and he gave people decision making rights to go with that, and he paid them accordingly. The problem was we had the wrong measure in
Hmm.
that case. And we got to that revenue target, but we didn't get there with a lot of the earnings that we had hoped to get along the way. Now, Michael has since corrected that, gone on to do amazing things with the company. And, it truly is one of the great success stories, I think, in corporate America.
Hmm.
So that's one example of where the stool got out of balance. It kind of fell over a little bit. We had to stand it back up, intervene, and rethink about balancing growth, profitability, and liquidity in that occasion. I
Hmm.
would say, paying people right. I'm going to talk a little bit about, an earnings per share plan here in a minute and one example, but, and there's a lot of downfalls you and I have seen with different ways in which people measure performance. And, it's hard to find one or two things, or maybe one thing that when it goes up, it's always better. And, I
Hmm.
think that really is the culmination of a lot of different thinking that you and I have done together over the years. But it really comes down to those basic fundamental principles of assign decision making rights, measuring them accordingly, and then paying them and getting that
Hmm.
all aligned. And then that ecosystem just kind of works.
Yeah, that's such a great point. There are so many measures that people think are useful for some reason, but they very often go down when good things happen, and go up when bad things happen. I mean, the core of modern corporate finance is discounted cash flow based on present valuing free cash flow. And free cash flow as a period measure is something that's grown in prominence in recent years. And for some businesses, especially those that really don't have much in terms of growth opportunities and so forth, they can be useful. But in most industries where there is growth and innovation and that sort of thing, it stifles growth. And actually, you find that the companies with the high free cash flow are actually the ones trading at the low multiples. So you have to be very careful about trying to find measures that, as you said, when they go up, good things happen. When they go down, bad things happen. So that's good. One other direction I'd like to go. Uh, you've talked before about the art of strategic finance in terms of alignment, rhythm, and truth. And I like what you have to say there, so maybe you could explain it. But in particular, I love the fact that you use the word rhythm. It just makes so much sense to me. And maybe once you go ahead and explain, it'll make sense to the audience as well.
Yeah, look, part of again the superpower of how do you bring an operating plan to life is thinking about like what you do to achieve that outcome. And so the outcomes you're trying to get are alignment, rhythm, and truth. And so what I mean by alignment is how do you align again that strategic intent to an operational plan, to a workforce plan, to a financial outcome. When you have that alignment, it's then only as good as your ability to then hold yourself accountable via the rhythm of the business. And what I mean by rhythm, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a more detail here in a minute, but it's the process by which you think about and make decisions at the velocity of the business and
Mhm.
hold yourself accountable to delivering that aligned plan I talked about. And then truth is, I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in over my 30 years in the finance world where we're having a conversation about a metric and not the business. And so, really understanding having one
Yeah.
source of truth so that you're not talking about the definition of the metric or how people measure it or how people interpret it, but you're all on the same page there. And then you have a good business conversation about making a decision given the metric and not debating the metric.
Hmm.
And so oftentimes though, Greg, it comes down to this rhythm concept. And a lot of people have good strategic intent. They often have a good financial plan, but then where you fall down is I only know one thing after you publish that financial plan. It's wrong.
Hmm.
And so it's a matter of the instrumentation that you have in place to be
Hmm.
able to then course correct given when life happens.
Hmm.
And that's gonna change, best laid plans, right? And so rhythm really helps you encapsulate and understand. For example, in my consumer days at Dell, the rhythm of that business wanted to be kind of daily or even by the hour. We're
Hmm.
making pricing decisions based on real time information online. You have to adjust the supply chain. You have to make sure that that's all coordinated upstream and downstream. And
Hmm.
so the velocity of that business was kind of daily, weekly. And so we had to have the instrumentation and the reviews and the management decision making process aligned with a daily, weekly rhythm, right?
Hmm.
Whereas at Varian Medical Systems, that's a large, kind of long life cycle, both product as well as selling cycle and product development cycle. That cycle is much longer in nature. The product life cycle is 10 to 15 years. So if you
Hmm.
missed that long range plan and didn't have the right product, then you missed a whole cycle and that could be very, very troublesome. And so that was more focused on how do we have the rigor in a kind of monthly or quarterly basis to review that long range plan consistently. We were always looking at the 5 year plan. We just didn't reset it once a year, right? We reset that long
Hmm.
range plan twice a year, 3 times a year, because that was the most important thing for us to make. And so
Hmm.
the rhythm of how you think about orchestrating decision making, right? Back to Jensen and Meckling, back to decision making and how you
Hmm.
measure that business is got to be aligned with the speed and velocity of the business. The last point about rhythm that I think is really important is you have to then also understand the duration of time it takes for your decision to impact the P&L or the financial outcome. And a lot of people have a rhythm that's set where they do an annual plan, but they start their annual plan, let's say if you're on a calendar year basis
Hmm.
at the end of September. And if you start at the end of September and you make a decision in the annual planning process, but it takes a year and change for it to get into the plan in the financials,
Hmm.
you're always chasing it because you're
Yeah.
making decisions too late because your rhythm is wrong. And so
Yeah.
those are the elements of rhythm: decision making, speed and velocity of the business, and then the duration of the impact into your financial results.
Hmm. Yeah, just on that note, I one of the things that bugs me is some of our clients have such rigid planning processes that when something comes up, as you say, it gets delayed until the next round of planning. And in order to sort of get that waived, requires this big laborious, mother may I kind of process that people say, oh God, I don't want to go through that, so they wait, and it reduces the sort of dynamic response time of the business. So you talked about Varian Medical Systems, which of course, I mean, wonderful business making radiation therapy equipment for treating cancer. When you were CFO there, we worked together, and some really great things came out of that, I think. So, can you share maybe the story of how you and your colleagues created so much value in such a short time at Varian?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And it was great to partner with you along the way in delivering that value. And it was a great outcome for patients, our doctors, our employees, our communities, our shareholders. And so, I would say that the first thing, again, back to the fundamentals of Jensen and Meckling, there's an acute measurement problem. And so, unfortunately, Varian was very focused on earnings per share because that's how the management team got paid. Their annual and their long range cash compensation plans were set up based on earnings per share. And they also, Greg, as you and I know, they gave quarterly guidance. And in a very lumpy, long cycle business, including product development cycles, selling cycles, product life cycle, you could miss shipping one or two linear accelerators, which are $1.5 million to $2 million, and materially miss your quarter. And that resulted in a lot of volatility in the share price. And as a result of that, what the management team was doing is they are being very cautious by cutting R&D and buying back stock to give themselves a margin of safety to not have that quarterly business volatility show up in results versus their guidance. All of that resulted in, they weren't providing or investing in innovation in the business as much as they could have and should have.
Mhm.
And so what did we do? I gave you a ring, said, all right, it's game time. We're going to finally get to work together. Didn't get to work together at Stern Stewart, but now we've got a live one on the hook. And so,
Mhm.
we moved to a residual cash earnings metric to be able to then, again, align decision-making rights, performance measurement system, and pay. And so that alignment was pretty clear when we did the work, right? We did the work over rolling 3-year periods of times for 15 years. The change
Mhm.
in residual cash earnings was the thing that was most highly correlated with the change in enterprise value. And so we kind of convinced the management team that that was a really good idea. So let's go do that. And so
Mhm.
the result of all that, right, was we did a couple of things. One is, we had to make a decision. We were getting competitive threats from one of our much smaller competitors in the industry, but they had a new breakthrough technology, and so we were pretty enamored with maybe buying that company. And
Mhm.
so, but we used residual cash earnings as the key to say no, we're not going to buy that company. And in fact, in lieu of that, we had been starving a software-based product that could leapfrog that product. And so we decided to make room in guidance, cut guidance, and we operationalized that cut by kind of doubling, even tripling the amount of money we were investing in that software-based product. We
Mhm.
accelerated the product roadmap by about 2 years. From the time we made that decision to launching, it was about 18 months. And that product accelerated our organic revenue growth rate from 3% to 9%. And we were off to the races. And that competitor we decided not to buy. And
Mhm.
let's just say they're not in such great shape right now. And so that, not only did we not, spend over $1 billion to buy a company, we created tremendous wealth for our shareholders by investing organically. Now, we did also invest inorganically. We decided to invest inorganically to enter a near adjacency in
Mhm.
interventional oncology that enabled us to capitalize on our go-to-market and call point with a new product to add to the bag. And so that ended up taking our growth rate from 8, 9 to 10, 11. And lo and behold, the stock price, as we thought, went from about $80 to over $140. And
Mhm.
like I said at the outset of this little piece, we created tremendous value for our doctors, our cancer patients. We doubled the number we were treating in 3 years. Our employees shared in that value creation. Our communities in which we were living and working in shared in that value creation, and shareholders,
Mhm.
obviously reap the benefits and the rewards. And so, but the system, it all started with working organically and inorganically with the right measurement system to drive innovation. And that's what helped us, was that residual cash earnings unlock to do what management knew was right, but we're kind of shackled up by a measurement system.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the idea that doing this reinforced what management intuitively felt was right, rather than what they were doing to try and do what they thought satisfied Wall Street. I think felt good for people. I still remember, running training sessions and having people from R&D and other functions like that, really liking what we were doing, really thinking that this was, going to improve the company and its ability to make decisions. So, I think it was a real win-win, as you say.
Indeed. No, it was great how integral and integrated your team was with us when we brought that to life. So we appreciate your partnership there, Greg.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Last question I want to ask you is, so now you're in private equity. You were public company CFO, you were a private equity CFO, then you were in private equity. Uh, what do you think are the good and the bad of private equity relative to a public company environment? It seems like more companies are going private these days than in past years. What is your view?
Yeah. Look, I think, you know, I'm going to say there's different horses for different courses, Greg. And, neither construct from a ownership perspective is right or wrong. They're just different for different reasons in my mind. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
in the public context, there's a way to grow and add capital to something that's a little more stable and predictable over time. And there's a size and a volatility piece to that equation as to, when you would need a public market investor. And I think what's changed in the last maybe 10 to 15 years is the velocity of change as well as the variation, so the magnitude of change have both accelerated. And in that
Hmm.
environment is causing more disruption at a faster rate. And
Hmm.
in order for a company to really evolve and change like that in the public domain is super hard because of some of the hard decisions you have to make that may
Hmm.
not be very popular in the short run, but in the long term, by all means, the right thing to do. And I think private capital enables you the opportunity to take that chance to transform, make those hard decisions, invest with a smaller group of people to be very efficient about doing so, make that change, get to the other side of it, and then either go back out or find a strategic investor to continue as the next owner to create value going forward. And so I think there's purpose for both in the market, and it's a matter of where are you on a point in time and
Hmm.
what decisions you have to make, and what are public markets going to do versus private markets to value that.
That's really great. So that I think we'll call it there. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. We've been speaking with Gary Bischoping. Thank you, Gary, for joining us for this important conversation.
Pleasure, Greg. Always fun.
You have been listening to Create More Value, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, and I am your host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Fortuna Advisors helps companies with strategy, capital deployment, business management, corporate culture, and incentive compensation, all aimed at driving top quartile total shareholder return and the equivalent for private companies. To learn more, contact us at info@fortuna-advisors.com.